I've just received an email from Mitravana Das, a brahmachari in America, who's engaged in the glorious service of distributing His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada's books. He wrote to me, "Dear Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances unto your lotus feet. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. I recently had a conversation with a god brother on the topic of book distribution and Harinam Sankirtan that I would like to seek clarification from your holiness on. This god brother was expressing the point, or you could say the point of view, that public Harinam is only a means to propagate book distribution and that Harinam should be conducted only in those places where the public is too inimical for book distribution. If a temple has a dozen devotees available for Sankirtan and the public is favorable and receptive toward taking the books, then it is better to engage all the devotees in book distribution. To support this, he quoted the following letter from His Divine Grace. No, it's the secretary's letter. Secretary Srila Prabhupada wrote to one of his godbrothers that Srila Prabhupada had said, on no account should street chanting should be stopped. Prabhupada has never said, it's addressing the same question. Prabhupada has never said that street chanting should be stopped. The chanting can go on for a little while, and when a crowd is drawn, books can be distributed. When I mentioned to Srila Prabhupada that when in LA last there was the system of book distribution all week long, and on weekend nights full street kirtans, he said that was a good system. Regarding the claim that devotees have difficulties maintaining Krishna consciousness by only doing book distribution with not enough street chanting, Prabhupada remarked that if things deteriorate, that is another thing, but it is not the fault of book distribution. Book distribution must not be neglected. End of quote. Hence the devotee with whom Mitravan is discussing this, his stance is that Harinam is only held to draw crowds and then facilitate book distribution. But if the crowd is ripe and ready to accept books, then even if there is facility to perform Harinam, only book distribution should be performed instead. Even if there are thousands of people gathered, it is better that a few of them have a chance to receive a book rather than the mass hearing the chanting. Well, my instant gut response to that would be, if there are thousands of people gathered and you can only distribute books to a few, then let them hear the chanting. Along with book distribution. Continuing the letter from Mitravan, I understand that book distribution is the central activity within Srila Prabhupada's movement and that he put very great emphasis on it. As Your Holiness has stated in your lectures, most people, including myself, come to Krishna consciousness due to having received one of Srila Prabhupada's transcendental books. Prabhupada also writes that book distribution is more important than street chanting because it is Brihad Kirtan. He said that his books are recorded kirtans and his kirtan undoubtedly has greater potency and purity than that of a neophyte devotee. However, it is my understanding that Srila Prabhupada wanted book distribution and Harinam Sankirtan propagated side by side, not that Harinam be relegated to a fallback measure where book distribution fails. In multiple letters written by Srila Prabhupada around the same time as the letter which we just read, Srila Prabhupada wrote, I am glad to learn that in Philadelphia they are increasing Sankirtan. It is our life and soul. Sankirtan should be increased as much as possible. Side by side is book selling. So here Sankirtan, Srila Prabhupada equates that with chanting as distinguished from book selling. Just 4 days later, in 1974, Srila Prabhupada wrote, it is this Sankirtan which is the life and soul of our movement. Sankirtan and book distribution should go on together side by side. It seems like it was a question this question was coming up in late 1974. That that should we just do book distribution or should we also do public chanting? And Srila Prabhupada is answering that in various letters. Here's another letter from late 1974. Regarding Gurukul, they are in financial difficulty, so introduce book distribution. Sankirtan and book distribution should be pushed side by side and there will be no difficulties. And another letter in late 1974. There is very good scope in Europe for this Sankirtan movement. If you just spread this chanting in Europe, then it becomes Vaikuntha. Side by side, push on the literature distribution as far as possible. I'm just going to make a note of that. That's a very inspiring quote. I must have read it more than once because I've been through Srila Prabhupada's letters and everything, but that just caught my attention. How Europe can become Vaikuntha by chanting, public chanting. All right, so continuing what Mitravan Prabhu has to say. In an earlier letter, Srila Prabhupada writes that if one or two devotees are chanting while book distribution is going on, that will increase the book distribution. In Your Holiness's recent podcast with Chaitanya Charan Prabhu, you mentioned that formerly people knew about the Hare Krishnas in the West because devotees would go on Harinam. 2 years ago in Croatia, Your Holiness suggested to the devotees there to establish a regular Harinam in Zagreb, in the like of the former New York City Harinam, with the idea that if a regular Harinam was going on in such a central city in a smaller country, the devotees would become known throughout Croatia. With this in mind, it is my understanding that although book distribution is the movement's central activity, Harinam Sankirtan is a necessary preaching tool needed to repopularize the Hare Krishna movement in the West. There are devotees that overemphasize the point of Harinam Sankirtan and minimize the necessity of book distribution, which has developed into a whole philosophy among themselves and widely influenced ISKCON in the West. In other words, they're saying, just do Harinam, don't do book distribution. They may not say grossly, but clearly, nevertheless. It's clear to me that this overemphasis of Harinam Sankirtan, well, in one sense, you can't overemphasize Harinam Sankirtan, but he qualifies that by saying, and minimization of book distribution is a deviation from what Srila Prabhupada taught. Yet the complete underemphasis of Harinam also seems to be not in accordance with Srila Prabhupada's side-by-side pushing. This is a point I have been considering for some time, and I have discussed it among other devotees to no satisfactory conclusion. I am seeking Your Holiness's authoritative answer on this subject. Your servant, Mitravan Das. Well, you have to see what works. Srila Prabhupada, actually in India, he stopped the devotees going on Harinam Sankirtan and had them do life membership, going to businessmen and asking them for a donation. At the time, 1,111 rupees, which nowadays seems ridiculous. It's such a small amount, but at that time was considerable amount of money, and they would give books. But Srila Prabhupada thought that devotees were being seen as beggars because it's a common system in India to chant the names of the Lord and beg. So we have to see what's best for spreading Krishna consciousness, but ultimately even the book distribution, that's also meant for getting people to chant Hare Krishna. And immediately by chanting the holy names, we may think, well, we could have, publicly chanting the holy names, we may think, well, more people could have taken books if those devotees had been distributing books. But chanting the holy names also lays the seeds for distributing books. Oxford Street is one of the most famous streets in the world, Oxford Street in London, where our devotees regularly do chanting, and we used, I'm not sure what goes on now, but it's gone up and down over the years. But in my travels throughout the world, I found that many people used to tell me that when I meet people doing book distribution or preaching or whatever, my days of going out office to office, door to door, shop to shop, book distribution, I don't do it as I used to do in the past as a regular service. So I'd meet people and say, oh, I saw you on Oxford Street. I saw you chanting. And what's it all about? And we would, that was the standard program that Srila Prabhupada had, to distribute Back to Godhead magazines along with the Sankirtan party. And I personally used to do that on Oxford Street in London. And all over the world, people from all over the world were getting the magazines like that. Mitravan is in Atlanta, which is a lot of flights going in and out of Atlanta, but it's nowhere near as cosmopolitan or as important a city internationally as is London. But still, people all over the state of Georgia in the USA will get to know of the Hare Krishna movement if we chant in public, and it's all a cumulative effect. If you do a lot of public chanting, people get to know you. You'll attract media attention. People come to like us, especially actually if we do prasadam distribution, give out little ladus or something like this. In New York City in the 1970s, they used to give out what they called laglus, which is actually more precisely called bundi ladu. And people loved it. People came to love the devotees. They're always out chanting and giving out these sweets, and it's all a cumulative purifying process. That was standard when I was in England in the 1970s. We would go out all week on book distribution, and then we'd all come together with traveling parties going out all over England. We'd go out for 1 week or 2 weeks, and then we'd all come back on Saturday night and have a huge Harinam in central London. That huge Harinam on Saturday night in central London is still going on. I presume it's been revived after the pandemic lockdown. So it's all required. Book distribution, absolutely required. Harinam is not just so that people will take more books. It's the essence of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's preaching process. But you have to see locally in each situation what is best for spreading the movement. And even devotees may have different opinions about that, but we have to follow ultimately what the leader in a center says. Otherwise, we'll all end up squabbling about we should do this or we should do that, and no one does much of anything. So yeah, Harinam should go on, and book distribution should go on. And book distribution, yes, Srila Prabhupada emphasized even more than public chanting, but at the same time he didn't want public chanting to stop. That's very clear from the quotes you have sent. So if you only have 12 devotees in the ashram, or make more by doing Harinam and book distribution, and then we'll have more devotees to do more chanting and more book distribution. That's a good solution, isn't it? Bring in more devotees. Of course, it's easier said than done, but it will happen, and we can, especially like this idea of Saturday night book distribution, because generally in the Western countries, people go out to so-called enjoy themselves on Saturday night. So we can go out and enjoy ourselves by chanting the holy names. And that's very good for engaging what we call congregational devotees, who can come and join with us and chant with us publicly. And it's a great way to help them to surrender to Krishna, because it can be difficult for them to do that, to go in public, especially in the city where they live and people know them. But they'll get a taste for chanting the holy names. And they can also be engaged in book distribution to the best of their capacity. Anyway, both should go on. That's very clear from what Srila Prabhupada said. It may be different in different situations. You may have to gauge the situation. Even if people are favorable, then they'll become more, if they're already favorable and you do public chanting, then they'll become more favorable by the chanting. You can sell them more books. That's also a consideration. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Vancha kalpa tarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Dante nitaya churnakang patiyo nipatyat kritvacha kakushata metadaham bravimi esadava sakala vihaya durat goranga chandra charne kurutanuraga. Parivadatu jano yata tatava nanumakarona vayam vicharayama. Harira samadhira madha. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna.